Hello, and welcome to Forget What You Learned, a place for families to stop and reflect on the modern state of education. We empower you to challenge your own thinking about today's traditional school system and ask the question, are my kids thriving? I'm Corey Greenberg, a parent in the trenches just like you, and I chat with innovators, experts, and other parents who are changing the conversation, inspiring families to reevaluate how we define academic success. This podcast is brought to you by Pacific Preparatory and Tutor Corps, sister organizations molding education through innovative one-on-one learning for students in today's digital world. In today's episode, our guest, who I like to call Dr. Bibi, truly takes us on a journey from how she's trying to affect change on an individual level as an educational therapist to her bird's eye view of our society's values around education, mental health, and social justice. She emphasizes the importance of understanding the larger systems at play and questioning the frameworks within which we operate. Dr. Bibi challenges the idea of a one-size-fits-all approach to education and highlights the need for nuance and complexity, something that can feel impossible when we're looking at systemic change. We dive into capitalism and standardized testing, and even the rabbit hole of AI phasing out the need for humans at all. It's not all doomsday, though, I promise. If you're like me, this conversation will stick with you for a while. Enjoy. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Bibi Pirayesh, an educator with 15 years of experience working with schools, families, and communities, just to help create a better understanding of the comprehensive needs of kids who learn differently. Her academic scholarship is mainly concerned with the social justice implications of the meeting place of education and neuroscience, and a deeper understanding of the factors that fuel the inequalities in our systems. What does that mean? Well, I've been acquainted with Bibi for about a year now, and her LinkedIn feed is consistently thought-provoking. She shines a light on how, for example, our mental health and education systems are capitalist at their very core. Private money is deeply intertwined with systems that are supposed to operate in the public's interest. And what does that truly mean for our kids in schools and those who need therapeutic support? We're going to have a big conversation today, and I'm pretty certain our listeners are going to come away after hearing from Bibi, like I do, with something they hadn't ever considered, and perhaps a desire to actually do something about it. Welcome to the show, Bibi.
My goodness, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with just a little background on what you do every day. You know, you work with kids one-on-one, but then you also tackle all these big societal issues. So what is a typical day like for you?
Well, there is no typical day. But I still do my work in my practice, my one-on-one work with kids. I don't think I will ever let that go because it really is what grounds me and fuels me and keeps me connected, both with kids and with families. And that, of course, entails working with schools and, colleagues and all of that. But I sort of, as a result of my own, I would say, transformation in the last 7, 8 years, and as a result of the raising of my own political consciousness, as both someone in the education and mental health field, but also as a bicultural person, and immigrants, as someone who has kind of, I think, a unique lens of being both inside and outside of the systems in the US. I have really added all these new layers to my work, where I really think it's important that as therapists, as educators, we are not just thinking about the students and their brains and their needs and what's going on with them within their classrooms, but also the larger systems and also ourselves within those larger systems. So more recently, my work has not shifted, but I've just added on more and more work, where I'm really engaging with, well, how do we support the adults? How do we support the mental health professionals, the diagnosticians, the educators, the educational therapists, etc., to really try and contextualize and understand how our systems are intertwined and work together, and how that impacts that one-on-one work that we have in a session or in a classroom or wherever. So my typical day, it involves reading, writing, posting, as you know, because I do think that you can do a lot of kind of activism, I think, on social media. And then I do a lot of training with adults, with people who are either becoming mental health professionals or educational therapists, and in sort of university settings. So I'm grading and lesson planning and doing all that stuff. And then I spent, especially now, I mean always, but especially now over the last few, well, I think it's been 135 days, but over the last few months, I've been even more politically kind of just paying attention, and trying to process and understand than usual, because I think that we are in this really unique moment in time right now where we're able to kind of transparently see through how some of our systems work and why. So as difficult as it has been, a great deal of my day these days is also just kind of, being on top of the news, and keeping track of who's saying what, and what is that going to mean for me when I go to vote, when I go to take political action. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer, but that's a day.
I love that. I think it's such a good mix of the micro and the macro. And I can tell you, I really relate to that personally because I have a social work background. And I remember
Mm,
early in my career, in graduate school too, you sort of learn how to help people on the micro level. So you learn therapeutic techniques and interventions and, how to kind of work with people who are struggling. And then once you do that work for a while, you realize that there are these systems at play that it's almost like, dumping a tiny little like drip drop of water in something that is a giant pool. And you have to
mhm.
look, zoom out and figure out how to affect the larger system so that it does trickle down to the individual. So it sounds like that's been your trajectory as well. Is start with the individuals and then you're like, we got to fix a lot of things on a bigger scale.
Yeah, I mean, I don't ever want to downplay the importance and the power of that small work, that one-on. I actually think that is the most powerful work, even when it comes to changing systems. Um, but what I really think and believe is that it's really about becoming conscious of things. It's really about understanding kind of the larger systems that we're in, our place in it. What does that mean for my everyday work? What does that mean for my mental health? What does that mean for the ways that things work or don't work in my practice? So it's understanding those things and understanding yourself in it that I think is really key. Kind of like in the way that we work with kids, where like helping them unpack their learning, helping them understand how they fit into this larger system. Why does this classroom system not work for them, etc. I think that all of us have to be doing that for ourselves in these systems. And oftentimes don't really get to. Oftentimes we go to school and we're just taught like, these are the techniques, this is what you have to do, and we don't really question it. And so we don't turn to kids and teach them to question things. And of course, that's like the entire point of an educated mind, is to question things. So yeah.
And that's actually a perfect segue because I would love to give our listeners kind of an example of one of these issues that you are raising consciousness about. So, one issue that's been in the news, I guess, over the past year or so is some listeners may have heard of the podcast Sold a Story about the science of reading and how we teach reading in this country. And there was just sort of an expose that happened
Mhm.
about, the ways in which maybe curriculum or the way we teach reading was not actually based in science and it was more based in lobbying and private interests and that kind of thing. And so that happened. And then there became a new discussion about how we teach math in this country. And I want to read really quickly because this is something from your LinkedIn. So I want to read that little piece and then maybe just you talk about, kind of give people an understanding of the issue.
Sure.
So this is what you said. There is no either or in math or reading. There's no one size fits all perfect curriculum teachers can purchase to forego the importance of getting to know their students and their needs. And there's no way forward if we keep presenting everything as debate. The issue we face in education, including how we teach math, require a far more nuanced approach than the false binary that we keep pushing. But the consequences of this tendency are far greater than just in education, as we basically model and prepare students for similar approaches to their life choices, including their politics. Let's normalize education as the practice of the complexity and nuance of reality, of sitting with discomfort and not knowing, of embracing tension instead of a product.
Hmm.
Amen. I loved that. Can you kind of give us some context of what exactly you're talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, so like you said, there has been a big blow up this last year. And in full disclosure, I actually did my master's degree at Teachers College Columbia. I was in a different program. I was in the developmental psychology program, but I worked for the Reading and Writing Project at Columbia at the time. I wasn't doing reading work. I was sort of in admin office working so that I could, pay for school and all that. But I remember, and I remember then that there are really, I mean, I learned this early on. There are a lot of forces behind what gets picked, what becomes mandated curriculum, that really has nothing to do with, um, and I'm saying this, saying at the same time that I don't think that that curriculum is bad or wrong. It's just, it doesn't necessarily work for every single student. Um, and a lot of the other curriculums that we used to have, like the phonics models that were just phonics, don't work for a lot of students. But this idea that we set up as like a war, and we do this in the big picture, like good versus evil, or us versus them. And then we do that, it sort of trickles down into what we do, for example, in our classrooms, where we talk about, is it science of reading? Do we do phonics or do we do whole language? And that entire setup from the very setup is incorrect. Um, something else that always comes to mind for me in terms of the ways in which we indoctrinate students in order to function in society in a very, very specific way, for example, is through multiple choice testing. And this idea that some other power is going to present you with pre-picked correct answers, and your job is to vote for one of those. And that is the extent of your job. You don't get to, question the question. You don't get to question any of the choices. And we essentially teach everyone to sort of think in these very simplified categories. Um, and we give them the impression that they're making choices as a result, and that education is somehow learning to make things simpler, when it's actually exactly the opposite. Education is learning to sit with tensions. Education is learning to complicate things further. But we don't do it that way, and we don't do it that way from a very young age, and we continue that on all the way through the training of people who then go to become teachers. And so I think, what, and after the whole, like, um, reading thing happened, now we're seeing the push of that into math, and like, well, what is the science of math? And I one of the classes that I teach is research methods. I'm a big proponent of empirical methodologies, but I also think it's really important that as educators and as psychologists and as people who are in these types of healing professions, that we recognize that empirical methodologies are too narrow a way to really try to shape and form human consciousness, which is ultimately what we are doing, whether we're in education or in mental health. We are dealing with human consciousness, and that does not exist in some kind of easy, you know, packaged category kind of way. And it's our job. It's really our job to push back against all of that, and say no. And I think, one of the things that in some ways the whole language debate was trying to do was to sort of push for that, but then it got thrown into that same binary kind of thinking that we're all used to, and that like rules all of our thinking and frameworks. So I think a lot of what we have to do as educators, as teachers, is to question the frameworks themselves and to encourage our students to question the frameworks themselves. And I think, as you know, now we're living in this time where there's all these questions about the future of education and the future of higher education, and now AI is coming into the picture. um, and and so we're either going to understand that our human brains and bodies and hearts and minds are capable of rising above and going into something bigger than all of this, or we're going to basically lose to machines that can do that binary choice a lot better than we can. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
I
I
mean,
definitely made it more complicated.
I was just going to say, I said we were going to have a big conversation. And I mean, you just basically said, the whole future of humanity is at stake here. So, yeah, I think we just kind of went there. So then when I was listening to you, I was thinking, so what is the ideal in your mind in terms of like how should we shape education? Because what you're describing is something that really can't be standardized. It's not,
Mhm.
and it can't be just filtered down from some government authority or anything. So what's the practical way that how should schools really be set up to truly educate our kids?
Well, I mean, we tend to think about this because we are constantly pushing, I think, politically, for political reasons. We're always pushing this narrative of our schools are broken and we don't know what to do, and how do we fix the education problem? But the fact of the matter is that most people who are in the field of, or many people who are in the field of education, know how to do this work. Most teachers understand the basics of what it means to shape and heal and help students and guide students. And we have been doing education, not just in our country, but in countries all around the world, pretty effectively for decades and decades. I mean, I'm not obviously saying that things have always been perfect or anything, but I do think that part of the issue is this hyper focus on, oh my God, everything is wrong and everything. There are many things that are wrong, but I don't think the things that are wrong have to do with educators not knowing how to educate. They have to do with other factors that are in play. And I think that resisting that idea of, oh my God, how do we fix the kids, or how do we help the kids? I think that's a big part of it, because you know the the guiding the next generation is something that is intrinsic to human beings. I mean, we are living in a very unique time in that our children today are going to be living probably in a future that is going to be so different from what we know and understand. But generally speaking, the pillars, the basics are there. Kids respond when they know that you care about them, when you know that when they know that they matter to you, and when you yourself, as an educator or a guide, have enough of the resources and peace essentially that is required for that learning to open up and happen, which is itself again intrinsic to all human beings. We don't have to teach kids how to learn. They already know how to learn. We just have to not undo that by indoctrinating them with curriculum that's not thoughtful and that's really meant to do something else. So I think the first step is to really kind of step back and trust our human instincts and our human abilities, and to trust that relationship between teachers and students, or even parents and kids. It's not, although yes, it is science, but it's also not rocket science in the sense of you. And I don't mean to say that we don't have to have teachers who are trained and understand and capable, but the majority of what really works is intrinsic to us. And I think a big thing that we need to shift is to move away from this approach where we're constantly throwing doubt in the middle of everything, and instead just saying, no, actually we do know what we're doing. We sort of do know what we're doing, and we have the science, we have the background, and if we just allow things to be, we've had many decades of successful education and educating in this country. This is not, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. I don't know. Again, I don't know if that answered your question, but
It does, and it makes me think, like, maybe the barrier to removing those is the capitalist piece, is the money interests and the ones that are, I mean, I don't wanna say it's evil, because that maybe that's part of our, like, American DNA too, is, to want the free market and all of that, but at the same time, it seems like those are the pieces that are getting in the way of just allowing teachers to do what they are trained to do.
yeah, I mean, I think a better answer, or a better term than evil is limited.
Mm,
So like when I talk to my students, who are in my research methods classes, and we're talking about, for example, empirical methodologies. um, Empiricism and science, Western scientific thinking, is really valuable. It's been able to give us a lot. It's been a really, really valuable tool for us as human beings. But the problem becomes when we make it the end all be all. And as a result, we miss out on all the other tools, all the other epistemologies, all the other lenses and ways of thinking and knowing that can help build a more complete, more interesting, more layered picture of our realities. And I think it's sort of the same, with capitalism. It's not that capitalism, although I don't think what we have in this country is capital. I don't think we have a free market economy,
yeah.
but it's not that on its own is, it's like this big evil thing, or money is bad. It's just very limited. And also, when you make that the highest value, over everything else, including human human life, essentially, or even human survival at this point. That's when you really begin to run into trouble. So it's, again, it's not that these ideas are terrible, evil, bad ideas, but it's the way that they get funneled into hierarchical systems where we basically put the wrong values. And when I say we, I don't necessarily mean, everyday people, because everyday people are every day becoming indoctrinated and acculturated into these systems that have been set up with a particular, um, goal and end in mind. But the responsibility of questioning all that ultimately falls on the everyday people. And again, that to me is the point of becoming educated. So there's like a famous, I think it was Rockefeller, who said, I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers. And when you have that kind of money and power, you are actually over generations able to um, tailor that. You're able to create that. Um, but the thing is that human beings are naturally thinkers. And it's only when we are able to get away from that endless working cycle that we have been forced into. And I think this was one of the big, um, a huge plus of the pandemic is that it gave us an opportunity to do that. And all of a sudden, I feel like everyone's consciousness was able to expand and grow. Um, when you get away from that and you allow yourself to be the mind thinks, it questions,
Mhm.
it wants to
Mhm.
know, it wants to understand. So again, I just think that to come sort of back to the micro level, I think that's one of the reasons why our jobs can be so powerful, because at least for an hour or 45 minutes, we're able to create a space where that can happen. And just an hour a week of that can be really, really powerful for students, as we know. Um, so yeah, I don't.
Yeah. It's it reminds me of another actually post on your LinkedIn feed that I pulled a quote from as well. It was right before school started for the academic year, and you were just kind of spreading awareness of kids who are neurodiverse and how, you know, fitting into the structure of our current system is really difficult for a lot of kids. And so this is one of the things you said. You said we're missing entire worlds, entire revolutions in the margins of books and the corners of rooms as we condition growths that could have been, revolutions that should have been, and call it an education. And again,
Mm.
I was like, mind blown.
Yeah, that was an. I think I posted with that a picture that one of my students had
Yes, a
drawn in
doodle.
a
Yeah.
doodle. Yeah, and it was like this incredible art piece that he just sort of like made on the margin of his notebook while he was, kind of checked out in class because because of his executive function, or at least that's how we would characterize it. Yeah. I It's interesting because I think that my own even my sort of understanding and thinking about neurodivergence is also developing. Like I'm really
Mhm.
beginning to now question, like, what does this mean? Like when we say neurotypical or neurodiverse, like what does this mean? Is neurotypical essentially how well we're able to mask and how well we're able to adjust to like the dominant structures that force us to behave a certain
Mhm.
way, and the neurodiverse kids or people are just the ones who are like struggling to do that because I don't know, for different reasons, for all kinds of different reasons. But what I do know is that the answers that we're looking for is actually with the neurodiverse groups who are able to point out to us our blind spots and what isn't
Mm.
working and what is oppressive about our systems. And and then I think that then the step from there is like actually checking in with the neurotypical students who seem to be adjusting really, really well, but are they actually adjusting really well? Like, is that um it's like the famous saying that it's not a sign of good mental health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick system.
Right.
And so, if your student is getting straight A's and kind of like just like I was when I was younger, and surviving and doing just fine and presenting in as if they're doing just fine, are they really doing fine? Or should we be worried about them just as much as we sometimes are about the kids who don't fit into that? Um,
100% yes to that. I mean, we just keep saying it over and over in this anxiety epidemic. And I mean, I think that has to be a huge piece is that there are so many expectations on our kids that I don't think are developmentally appropriate a lot of times or are just, it's not even development, it's just human nature. It's too much. It's too many things. And I think we're seeing that because of exactly what you just said.
Yeah, and I mean, we technology has also played a huge role in
Yeah.
that. I mean, for me, I can wake up right now and I can pick up my phone and like literally look into what is happening in different parts of the world all over the globe. The human brain is not capable of processing that.
Mm,
And we are in a time in which, this new generation of kids are coming up with this from day one. So they've never known a different kind of being. And so they are constantly being bombarded with just so much information that no human brain really is equipped to be able to process. Now, how this is going to evolve, how we're going to evolve as a result, I don't know. But I think that given the circumstances that we're in, if you are not feeling anxious, I think I would be more concerned, because that
yeah.
seems like a really, really healthy response to basically the world that you have to process.
Yeah. It's this is a total non sequitur, but it just made me think. I think that our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. I was listening to my one of my middle schoolers with his friend talk about how they don't like going to the movies
Mhm.
because it's too long. They have to sit too long in one place. And my mind was blown because that's all I did as a kid was watch movies. And now with YouTube Shorts, why watch a movie?
Right. And I mean, it's so interesting that you bring up movies, because I was a big movie buff my whole entire life. And I was actually having this very similar conversation recently with a friend where I was like, when I'm at home, like even when it's a film that I've really, really been excited to see, when I turn it on, I can't put my phone away. I
Mhm.
still, like in the middle of the film, I'm sort of multitasking,
Yeah.
looking on my phone. What else is going on? And I do agree that our attention spans are definitely shrinking. Mine certainly has. And again, it's tricky because we can't say to kids or even to ourselves that you need to somehow live outside of what has now become the cultural norm. But at the same time, we know that real learning requires deep, deep attention over a prolonged period of time. So the kind of um, you know learning and creating that comes from that deep and prolonged attention is just a different thing altogether. And how is that going to shift? How are our very ideas about learning, about art, about writing, about reading, about all of these things, about human thinking essentially, how is that all going to shift as a result of these technologies that, I mean, the other thing that we have to also remember is that it's quite addictive. There's an
Yes.
addiction component to all of this, that our brains just, we can't like will ourselves out of. Um, so yeah, I think it's an incredibly difficult time to be human right now. And that's outside of like global warming and turmoil and
Yeah.
politics and all of that. Just being alive right now, I think, is really difficult. And
Yeah.
it's definitely a transitional period where we're going into an unknown, an evolutionary unknown possibly.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, we have to be really extra gentle with ourselves.
And I mean, as we think about maybe wrapping up, because I also feel like we could talk about a million more topics and we would be here ourselves for hours and hours. But I would like to know what do you think what should we leave people with from this conversation? Like what do you think people who are maybe had their mind a little opened, from listening to this, what's the first step is just to be a little more aware, like you said, of what kind of bigger systems or motivations are at play, or what do you think people should do?
I mean, I think I would want the two big takeaways that I always kind of in one form or another, I hope people take. One is trust yourself, trust your humanity, trust the process, trust your instincts. give yourself enough space to actually for your instincts to come out, because I think sometimes we don't even do that. So I think that's one, is that the answer, you have all the answers you need, and to trust that. Um, and this is, whether you're a teacher, you're a therapist, you're a student. And then the other one is, uh, yeah, to try and, because we tend to get so bogged down in all the things that we have to do and all the things that are wrong, that we really kind of forget the forest for the trees. So to kind of to intentionally try and ask questions, like fundamental philosophical questions about, like, what are we doing here? What is the purpose of this? Why are we doing it in this particular way? What does this mean in this larger picture? Human beings are philosophical, spiritual beings, and one of the things that we have really, like, pulled out of our education, mental health, all of that has been those components. So to intentionally try to bring that back to your own thinking, even in the smallest ways, and when those types of things come up, instead of dismissing it, honoring it. I think, I think those are, like, small little takeaways.
I love that. I love both of those things. And I think the latter takes a little bravery when in the parenting journey, especially when you're
Mm,
in, at risk of getting swept up in, the sort of high pressure world of college admissions, or comparing yourself to other families and that kind of thing. And so it takes a little bravery, but at the same time, I think if you do sit with yourself for a minute and say, like, what are we really doing? Is my kid okay? If the answer is no, then you kind of have your answer. So
and Corey, if I can just say one thing about that, because, parent, we talk about kids, we talk about teacher, but parenting, I think, is, we don't talk enough about how incredibly stressful parenting has become. But all of these things, like what parenting and, like, oh my God, am I doing it right? All of that, the same with the teachers, the same with neurodiversity, all of these things have the same issue at their core. And the same issue is this assumption that there is a right ideal way. And that's actually a white supremacist assumption.
mm,
That's an assumption of, there is this perfect way that I'm supposed to be, and if I don't do it that way, I'm constantly falling short. So I constantly have anxiety. And we bring that thinking into our parenting, into our teaching, into our learning, into everything.
mm,
And that could not be further from the truth in terms of how human beings actually work. There is no one right or ideal way. The name of the game is whatever it is that you're doing, is the recognition of the diversity in which we experience life as human beings, whatever choices that you happen to make. So there is no perfection. And I think that that really sits at the core of our cultural ideology and thinking. And it bleeds into everything. And it's part of why, we struggle as much as we do. But it's just not true. It's not true. There is no there isn't, even with, like, so much of the in mental health, with all this, like, self-help stuff and, like, go to therapy and blah blah blah, as if there's some, like, healed version of a human being. I had a parent who called me a few weeks ago, crying, because she's going through, some physical disability stuff that's really impacting her children and their family. And she was just like, I really, really just want them to grow up to be well-adjusted adults. And I was like, I don't think that's a thing. I don't, we we have, like, yes, you want them to have skills and ways and resources to help anchor themselves and be able to work through life. But it's not like there's some well-adjusted adults that you're supposed to, like, you know, raise your kids into being. And if you don't do it, then their lives are over. Like, it's just so much more complex than that. And the pressure that we put on ourselves sometimes, actually hinders us from being able to be present for our children, which is ultimately the thing that's going to make them the most well-adjusted version of themselves.
Yeah. And you just summed up the exact reason for this podcast. Forget what you learned is getting at, like, let's highlight the ways in which people are doing things differently so that we can begin to normalize it.
Mm-hmm.
Every episode sort of has that angle to it, is that there isn't just one way, and let's expand our minds at as to all the different ways that people are doing things, because I think, me as a parent, it's very helpful to hear all, that it just helps you not have tunnel vision of
Right.
those
And I mean,
expectations. So
when you look at life, when you look at nature, that's what you see. You see
yeah.
all these beings figuring out different ways of doing it. And that's the entire point. That's the
Yeah.
entire point.
Yep. Okay. So, lastly, what is a
Mhm.
book? I mean, I feel like, you're one of probably the most well-read people I know in my world, but can you think of one book that you recommend that our listeners listen to? Or I'm sorry, read. Could be listen to. Read or listen to.
Okay, so I'm going to recommend, just in light of our conversation, a book that I just got in the mail today. So I haven't read it. But given what we just said, I think maybe this would be a good book for. I'm going to read it, and so maybe everyone else who's looking for a book. It's called "Rest is Resistance: A
Okay.
Manifesto," and I founder of the Nap Ministry. I don't know
Mhm.
what
Oh,
that is,
that sounds
but
appealing.
I know it does, right? But I again, to kind of bring it back to some of what I have been, you know, the last few months have been especially difficult. And I've really been questioning this idea of, like, what does it mean to do activism work right now? What does it mean to resist right now? What does it mean to be a teacher right now? And something about this is just very appealing to me, because I feel like as we are processing everything that we're processing, our bodies and our minds are asking for rest. And the idea of remembering that that is actually, survival is resistance, and rest is resistance. So I think I'm going to go with that book.
I love that. It sounds really unique. And I will put that on my list, and we'll put it in the show notes too. So, Bibi, it has been a pleasure. I knew it was going to be a pleasure talking to you on this podcast, so I'm so glad that you came on. Where can people find you if they want to read your amazing things that you write, or even come to you for educational therapy? Where can they find you?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, I do, like you said, tend to be somewhat active on LinkedIn, so that's always a good place to find me. I am actually in the middle of, I wouldn't call it a rebrand, but I'm in the middle of designing a new website, a new community, and a new set of courses, actually, for teachers and for mental health professionals, to specifically help support them along this idea of, how to do their work, but in a politically conscious way. So all of that is going to be coming down the pipeline. But for the time being, my website, www.oneofonekids.org, is, where you can contact me. If you put in, like, there's like a little form on there. If you put your information in there, it comes to me. You're welcome to share my email if you like. But if you are, if people are interested in kind of learning more about all the things that are coming down the pipe for me, just let me know that you want to be added to my email list, and I can put you on my email list, and then that way you know. But you'd have to email me to let me know. Otherwise, there's
Great.
nothing on the website that's going to get you to it yet.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's fantastic. I can't wait to see what you're up to, the next thing. And in the meantime, I'll be checking your LinkedIn like a stalker. And I just really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a lovely, like, meta conversation. It was
Yeah.
actually a great example of taking the time
Yep.
to have these conversations. So thank you, Corey.
Absolutely. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Forget What You Learned, hosted by me, Corey Greenberg. As always, our goal is to allow you to zoom out on the snapshot of your family's life and answer the question, are my kids thriving? We're here to inspire you to make those small and maybe big changes to answer yes. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Pacific Preparatory and Tutor Corps, sister organizations committed to educating students with an innovative and holistic approach in today's digital world. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave a rating and review. See you next time.